This past summer, I spent over 100 hours standing on front porches, just waiting. And as I stood there with my purple knuckles and my sweat-soaked shirt, I had a lot of time to think about what I was doing there and why. See, I found myself in the position because I had taken on an internship with a Senate campaign, and the vast majority of my campaign was knocking door to door with clipboards. Over the span of the campaign, I had over 2,600 knocking attempts, but I can easily say it was my failed attempts that were always the most memorable. Whether it was the time that I was greeted by a man in a colorful wig who told me he recognized me from a past life, or the lady who met me through her futuristic doorbell and yelled at me and then called the cops, time after time, I was handed these rejections in the most hilarious fashion. On the other hand, over 2,000 of my attempts were what I came to call micro-rejections, moments where I would go to the door and knock and wait for about 15 seconds of silence until I realized that no one was coming to greet me. It was in these moments I found my time for contemplation. I considered things like what they might be thinking, how I might act if all our roles were reversed. I took these lessons with me until November 6th, when, after about 13 hours between the campaign headquarters and driving around suburban Nashville, I crammed into a small downtown hotel and began to watch a large projector screen. Briefly after that, however, the votes were tallied and my candidate had ended up losing. I headed home that night with disappointment. And I was upset, but it didn't destroy me because it wasn't my first time facing a similar fate, nor was it my most formative. It wouldn't be right to talk about this topic if I didn't speak about the time I learned my greatest lesson. About 11 months ago today, I sat on this very stage as a candidate for a position I had always wanted to win, student body president. I'm not here to make any sort of excuses or justify my loss. I simply came up against strong opposition, but after the election, I couldn't see that. It revealed a deep flaw within me, one that not only hindered me from admitting that fact, but blinded me entirely from even seeing it. Afterwards, I saw the entire election as a very, very personal rejection. Selfishly, I was unable to perceive anything outside of myself, and it was to the point that one day, a faculty member pulled me aside and asked me to express how I was feeling. Now, it's one thing to grumble in the car or to pout quietly in class, as I would, but it's different when you verbalize your purposes. I did that day. When I let out my complaints, I learned something that scared me. I said things like, why don't I get to be called Mr. President in the halls? Why don't I get to put that on my resume? Why don't I get to sit in the reserved seats during assembly? And that is what I cared about. And it's trivial, I know, and feel free to laugh. It's embarrassing, but it's true. That is what I cared about. The labels, the titles, the rewards. When I realized my intentions, honestly, I was horrified. I knew it was wrong, but I also knew at the same time I had a long journey ahead of me before I was able to fix this, because it was deeper than I had thought. Over the summer, I was very lucky, almost accidentally, able to take part in a lot of events that foundationally revolutionized who I was both as a person and as a leader. I took a brief philosophy course, I found my canvassing internship that I mentioned earlier, and I even was able to complete my Eagle Scout service project. The philosophy course in particular was very influential to me. And at my time at the university, they offered a seminar called Rejection Therapy. It was very timely, and I thought I needed it, so of course I gladly signed up. And when I was there, I watched this video that ended up meaning a lot to me. I want to briefly share a clip of that video with you today.
And in that picture, which you can see, I quoted Martin Luther King Jr. Why? Because in my research, I found the people who really changed the world, who changed the way we live and the way we think, are the people who were met with initial and often violent rejections. People like Martin Luther King Jr., like Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, or even Jesus Christ. These people did not let rejection define them. They let their own reaction after rejection define themselves. And they embrace rejection. And we don't have to be those people to learn about rejection. And in my case, rejection was my curse, was my boogeyman. It has bothered me my whole life. because I was running away from it. Then I started embracing it. I turned that into the biggest gift in my life.
So I loved this video when I first saw it, and I would strongly recommend all of you, if you get the time, to go home and watch it. But it grew increasingly relevant to me over the coming months as I found my internship and senior year began. Honestly, if you found me at the beginning of senior year and asked me how I changed over the last 3 months, I would say I was a different person. I would say I was wrong then and I'm better now. But little did I know the greatest test of my character was still yet to come. Because at the beginning of senior year, the process of college applications began. I had already made my decision over the summer where I wanted to apply, and so for me it was simply a matter of dedicating dozens of hours to my essays and my interview, and then waiting. A challenge I absolutely hated. Slowly I became obsessive almost with the idea of my admission. I became frustrated by the fact I felt I had so little control over my fate at this moment. But at the end of those long months, on December 13th, I opened up my laptop, I refreshed my portal, I clicked on the status update, but again, I received disappointing news. Rather than acceptance to the school I had planned to attend for so many years, I was instead informed that I was deferred. And admittedly not an outright rejection, it was impossible to convince myself of such at first, because I had the naive conception that this was who I was supposed to be. And at that moment, I felt lost and I wasn't sure where to move next. Amidst all this confusion, I found solace in retreating to a method that had been so helpful to me after my student government loss. Clearly, I was upset, but I had to ask myself, why was I upset? Did I get any dumber because I wasn't accepted? Did I receive any physical harm when I read that letter? The answer to both of these is obviously no, but still I remained upset until I found the answer to my question. This time, again, I received disappointing news, but it wasn't from some election, and it wasn't from some college, it was instead from within myself. Because the journey that I'd begun just 8 months prior that I thought was done, I thought I had changed, I realized I was still, in many ways, the same person. Because when I answered that question, I found things that scared me again. I was upset because I didn't get to go to school the next day wearing the iconic university sweater. I was upset because I didn't immediately get to go on to Instagram and change my bio to that college class of 2023. And more than anything, I was upset because walking through the hallways of Ensworth High School, I didn't get to be that kid that got into that college. Of course, I had other intentions of applying to this college, but the fact that these were my first frustrations, the fact that these were the things that came to my mind, sent up a red flag. My journey, while I had made strides, I still stumbled along it, and in this case, fell flat on my face. So I was forced to reevaluate my intentions deeply and more truthfully as I moved on to the next phase of applying, a phase that I stand right now still waiting on, just waiting. And finally, I want to harken back to something I had said earlier about the inability for us to control our fate. My entire high school career, I followed what I thought was my path to what I felt necessary was my goals. I told myself if I held these positions, if I did all this work, if I got these grades, I would end up where I wanted to be, with the rewards and the titles and the special treatments and the acceptances to go along with that. But as you can see, that didn't always add up for me. And I'm here today to tell you that's not a bad thing. Because one important consideration that the faculty member offered me in the aftermath of my loss was to reframe my state of mind around these events. Rather than asking as I was, why is this happening to me, which I admittedly had no right to ask, instead think about why this might be happening for me. And I'll be honest with you, I dismissed this right away, because when you're so sure of your own understanding, it's difficult to take advice like that. But today, I cannot overstate how helpful this perspective has been to me. Because sure, I didn't enjoy the loss. I didn't enjoy getting hundreds of doors slammed in my face. I didn't enjoy getting deferred from the school I thought was my dream school. But I'm so glad that I did. Because I don't think it would be a stretch to say that these are some of the most positive experiences of my life. And that might shock y'all, but I'm not saying the happiest, the most enjoyable, or the ones I'll look back on most favorably, but most positive because are there any moments I can look back on and see how much of a change I have sought out to make since then? Because like the speaker on that video, rejection was my boogeyman. I love that word. Rejection was my boogeyman. I was so scared of it. I mean, I willfully chose not to try things I thought might end up defining me as being that kid that came up short. But if it were not for these pivotal failures that I've experienced, I would have learned nothing. We've all heard the common advice to learn from your mistakes or to learn from your failures, but it took me these moments to understand that's not merely some consolation prize when you're in loss. If it weren't for these moments, I would never have begun to ask myself the deeper questions that so govern my life today. I would never have sought to understand the why of my aspirations. I would never have sought out to fundamentally change who I was as a person, a change I feel was very desperately needed. So I'll conclude with this. For all of us in this room, the greatest opportunities always threaten the greatest opportunities for rejection. And I challenge you to not fear that threat, but rather to welcome it. And if there's one thing you take away from this speech, please take the challenge, because whether we're trying out for a team or applying for a spot or running for a position, do not fear the chance of coming up short, because that's what hinders us. And it took me these experiences, these harsh lessons, to understand that sometimes failure is not always a setback. Sometimes it's what drives us the most. Therefore, for all of these rejections and the many more I hope to face soon, I've learned to be grateful. Thank you.